Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining the first pre-recorded webinar of the Enablement Squad. And I'm actually going to be your presenter today. And today we are going to talk about adoption. And I want to start by explaining why I chose this topic. So as enablers, the baseline for our success is pretty simple. We build things and people have to use the things that we put out into the world. So we can design great programs, we can run thoughtful trainings, we can roll out new processes. But if people don't use them, so if there is no behavior change, then we aren't able to show our impact. And if we can't show impact, then the work that we do will get questioned, right? So that's why I wanted to talk about adoption today, because adoption is really hard. It's hard to get. So before we get into it, I want to kind of ground ourselves into what adoption actually means. So I just pulled this definition off of Google. Adoption is the action or fact of choosing to take up, follow, or use something. So there's that key word in there, choosing, choice, right? So adoption cannot be forced, and it cannot even be required, really. Because you can require attendance, you can require someone to complete a certification, you can require acknowledgement, but you cannot require choice. And that's why adoption is such a critical concept for enablement. Because if someone doesn't choose to change their behavior, then nothing is going to change. Nothing actually changes. So when we talk about adoption, we're not just talking about tools or the content, but we're talking about whether someone in the moment that matters chooses that new way over the old one. And that choice is what determines whether our work has impact or not. So this is where everything starts to connect, right? Adoption is the currency of enablement. So what I mean by that is this is really how we are measured. This is how that impact is measured. It's not really going to be, yes, we measure this, but it's not by how many programs we've launched or how much content we make, not even by how many people attend a training. Those are all metrics, sure, but they're not really telling us about impact, right? And that's what we are truly measured by. And what we should be measured by is our impact. But impact only happens through behavior change. But behavior will not change unless someone chooses to change it. And so that brings us right back to adoption, right? If there is no adoption, then there's no sustained behavior change. And if there's no behavior change, there's no impact that we can point to. So this is why adoption is not a nice to have for us in enablement. It is the thing that everything else depends on. So if adoption is so important, right? The obvious question is, why does it fail so often? And maybe that's not your experience, but it is certainly my experience in enablement. So hopefully this does sound familiar. So when we want adoption as enablers, we typically try and get ahead of it all, right? So we'll send emails, weeks in advance, letting people know, hey, this program is coming out and it's going to be awesome and you're going to learn so much and it's going to help you make money and all of that. Maybe we'll sneak into the manager meeting or leadership meetings and we'll talk to managers and explain why this is so important and why they have to help us with the reinforcement piece, right? Maybe we'll send Slack messages and put like funny pictures just to make it fun, a few memes here and there, trying to just build excitement for this program that we built. Maybe we'll jump into regular meetings too. So if a sales team, for example, is having, their meetup, maybe you'll pop in, hey guys, just a heads up, this is gonna launch in a few weeks. Get excited, yeah. And all of that does feel like the right thing to do. It's not necessarily wrong. I mean, we're communicating in advance, we're socializing it, trying to make it apparent that this is going to be happening. We're doing all of this work. But the thing is that even if we do all of that, adoption might not happen and probably doesn't happen. And it's super frustrating, right? Because we put in all of this effort, and yet once the program is complete, everybody went through the thing, nothing changes. So it's not about whether we tried, because obviously we did. The question is, why is none of that working? And so this is where I want to talk about a pattern. And by the way, I include myself in this for years. And so the pattern is, we'll build the thing and then hope they use the thing. So you may know what I mean already, but let me explain. So very early on in my career, any trainings that I would do or programs that I would run, it would be because the manager dictated what was needed. So they'll say, hey, enablement, we need a training on X. Now, in my younger days, way back when I was early in enablement, yes, sir, right away, sir. And I would create the training, right? And then later on in my career, I learned, actually, no, we should look at metrics. We should identify behaviors that need to change in order to impact those metrics. And then I would start building. So I'd look at that. Oh, okay, I see a conversion rate dip here. We need to change this behavior or this competency. And then I would build. However, what I wasn't doing, I wasn't really talking to the people I was building for, at least not enough anyway, about that specific program or training, whatever. I wasn't pulling them into the process. And I also wasn't pressure testing my assumptions based on what I was learning from the metrics. I was just building. And truthfully, some of these programs I built, they were really good. And I was really excited to deliver them because I really thought that they were going to make a big impact. And I also did a ton of reinforcement afterwards. I did a ton of follow-up. I did all of the right enablement things. And still, adoption didn't happen. So if this feels familiar and this is what you have been doing, you and I are doing it wrong. So here's the important part. Adoption failure does not happen when the thing is launched. It actually happened way before the thing was ever built in the first place. Adoption means change. Change is a very human experience. And I've been doing a lot of research in psychology, and I'll talk about that a little bit later, but I read about a statistic that came from change expert John Cotter that said about maybe north of 60 to 70% of change initiatives will fail because the human elements of change aren't addressed. The solution may have been right, but we weren't looking at the emotional side, the psychological side. So when we are building programs for people instead of with people, we really shouldn't be that surprised if adoption doesn't end up happening. Because people don't adopt what they don't feel a connection to. They need to feel connected to it in some way. So I'm going to repeat that sentence again. So we can't build programs for people. We have to build programs with people. So how do we do that? How do we make this change happen? So again, I've been doing a lot of reading around psychology and just human behavior because I was very interested about why my programs weren't sticking. And I came up with the adoption effect. So if adoption is the currency of enablement, we need a repeatable way to understand how adoption happens. So again, reading through several different psychology books and just kind of observing behavior change and how it happens, this is the adoption effect. So it's a chain. And if the chain breaks early or late, you're not going to get adoption at the end, no matter how good your program is. So let's get into it. So the first step or stage is trust. So one of the psychologists that I read up a lot about was Amy Edmondson, and her research on psychological safety, it describes that as a shared belief that the environment that you are in is safe for interpersonal risk-taking, which means being able to speak up if you disagree with something or asking questions that maybe you have a misunderstanding. You're also allowed to admit when you mess up. So that being said, trust, especially in this context, in a business environment, it means psychological safety. We need the people that we are working with and building programs for to feel that it's safe to be honest with us. It's safe to say what's not working. It's safe to say, I think you're wrong. It's safe to admit confusion, frustration, or even resistance. So this is kind of where venting might come in. Because if someone feels that they can trust you, they're actually okay with coming to vent to you. And when they vent, it's not necessarily, I mean, maybe it's negative, fine, but it's also pretty good information. So it means that they're trusting you enough to tell you the truth about what's going on. And in enablement, the truth is the only thing that's going to help us build something that actually gets used. So when you have that psychological safety, you're not just going to get more communication, because, with trust, you're going to get communication, but with psychological safety, you're going to get honest communication. And honest communication is going to reveal the reality of what's actually happening in the field, what's broken, where, the workflow is not working. What are some people doing instead, even though they're supposed to be doing something else? And why are they doing that thing? So practically, trust isn't like a nice culture thing. I mean, yes, it's great to have trust, but it's also the precondition for getting the information you need to design something people will adopt. As a side note, if you hear my bird chirping, I have a bird. So getting back to this. So I want you to think about the last time someone told you the real reason they weren't using something, right? There's a good chance they probably didn't put that in a survey that went out. They probably said it in a Slack channel or in a side conversation. So that's trust, that's psychological safety. So the next stage is input. In other words, questions and co-creation. So once that trust is there, input is going to become possible. And this is where adoption starts to become designable. So this is where we can stop assuming things and start actually involving those people that are going to be using our programs. So to clarify, when I say input, I don't mean feedback on the completed program. This is way before that. This means asking questions before anything is built at all. So being able to ask those questions to, let's say you're working with sales reps. What have you tried? What could have helped? What does good look like? Did you achieve that yet? So those questions you're able to ask and get honest answers to are going to do two things. So they're going to give you insight, clearly, but they're also going to communicate something else to those reps, for example, that you're working with. It's telling them your experience matters to me. Your experience is important in this process of developing this program. And there's a psychological reason that that happens, where they're like, oh, wow, like this matters. This is important. I'm involved in this. So there's research that was done on something called the IKEA effect. I think it happened in the 60s. I'm not quite sure. But this basically means people value what they help create far more than what is just handed to them. So in one set of studies that they did on the IKEA effect, people were willing to pay about 63% more for products they assembled themselves compared to identical pre-assembled items. So in other words, they were happy to pay for what they contributed to over something that was just offered. So in other words, effort creates attachment and contribution creates value. So when these people that you're, again, building these programs for contribute ideas and experiences to a solution, it's not going to just make them like it more. They start to feel psychological ownership of that thing. So they're basically moving from passive recipients to active stakeholders. And that shift is huge for us. We absolutely want that because that's going to bring us to that ownership. So third stage is ownership. Ownership is what happens when people can see themselves in the thing. So they had a hand in shaping it. They recognize their own reality in it. So this is where it becomes not just an enablement program, it becomes our way of doing this. Our way meaning the people you're building it for. They feel like it's ours. So if you wanted to test for ownership, you can just kind of listen to the language that people are using when they talk about your program. So if they're saying things like, oh yeah, enablement wants us to do this, or enablement planned for this, or whatever, they don't feel ownership in that because it doesn't feel like theirs. But if they say something like, oh, we do this now, this is how we do things, that is ownership. So this is also, by the way, the stage where managers are really going to matter because they need to help make this new behavior that's being created feel normal, feel supported, and worth it. So yes, it is important for managers to reinforce after the program happens, but you want to get them involved way early so that they can help normalize this new behavior. So this is where you're going to want to get them involved as well. Okay, so the next stage is belief. And this is the real gateway here because belief is the thing that makes someone choose the new behavior even when they're not being monitored by a manager or by enablement, or they know someone's going to look at their conversation in their CI tool. They do it because they believe it. They believe it's going to work. So now belief, I believe, or I think, I think belief is really, there are three parts to it. So the first part is relevance. So what this means, if I'm the person receiving this information where I'm going to have to do something, I'm going to think, well, does this actually help me? And is it connected to something that I care about? So if we're talking about sales reps, if a rep can't connect it to, for example, saving time or a deal moving forward or feeling confident in a conversation they're having with a customer, it's not going to land. It needs to feel relevant to them. The second belief, or the second part of belief, is efficacy. So what efficacy means is I would be thinking to myself if I were receiving this program, do I believe that this will work for me specifically in my current situation or in my reality? Often, enablement proves that something works in theory, but not necessarily in practice. But adoption is only going to happen when someone believes it will work in the chaos of their lives, of their accounts that they're working, of their customers, of their calendar. They have to believe it's going to work in their reality. So this is why examples, practice, and real manager reinforcement matter so much more than if the training you put out is perfect. So that's efficacy. The third and final part is priority. And this one I would say is probably the most important, truthfully. You need all three, but this one's a big one. And this is where they're asking, is this worth my attention right now? Should I prioritize this? And I feel like we might underestimate this one a little bit because even if we put something out that's super relevant and it is effective, if it's going to compete with like, I have to meet my quota, or, I've always done it this way and I'm not changing because it works, they're going to prioritize that over what you're delivering, always. So this means that there needs to be a belief that this is going to be worth the trade-off. So it's not just buy-in, right? Belief is not just buy-in. It is relevance, it is efficacy, and priority all stacked together. So if any of the three are missing, adoption is going to become very fragile and probably not happen. So now finally, stage 5, and then we get to adoption. Adoption is what it looks like when belief turns into consistent behavior. So it needs to be a true behavior change. It can't just be they try it, because we've seen that. I've certainly seen that where they're like, oh, maybe this could work, and they try it, but then they don't continue, right? So that's not adoption. Adoption means the belief has turned into consistent behavior. The behavior is officially changed. So it's not about the attendance, it's not about completing the course that you put out or whatever. It is the behavior has now officially changed. And you'll be able to see that if you look in a CI tool and see how reps are running discovery, for example, if you did a program on discovery. Maybe it's how they update deals. Maybe it's how they prepare for a call. Maybe it's that they make it a point or a habit to practice role plays before calls. Maybe it's how they use a certain tool. Maybe it's how they talk about their approach. So adoption is going to show up in those patterns. And that's what we need to look for to make sure that adoption has happened. So the point of this whole framework is super simple. If you want adoption, you can't just start at rolling out your program. That's not where you're going to get the adoption. It starts all the way at the beginning of this adoption effect at trust. And then you build that chain very deliberately. Okay. So this is normally where I would ask for questions, but this is pre-recorded. But if you do have questions, I do have, I'm going to put out a doc that you can, if you want more information on this, you can feel free. So now that we walked through this chain of the adoption effect, how are we going to design a program so that this chain is going to actually form without it taking like 6 months and a miracle to do this? So with that, I want to tell a little story. And I'm going to be honest, this is not like a dramatic, oh, a huge failure turned into an amazing success, right? So this is just a practical example of that really does illustrate this adoption effect. And so this was a few years ago. I was working with an SDR team and we were doing work. Well, basically we saw that the sequencing that they had for cold calling and email outreach and LinkedIn, et cetera, it just was not working very well. And so this was something that, leadership wanted to change. So going into that and knowing that information, I could have done what I think usually gets done, right? Because we have expertise in that area, right? Like we know what best practices are for creating sequences. We know how to build a good outreach script, right? So I could have just built a new sequence based on research of other people's sequences and based on what's worked and whatever. And then I could have put it all together, wrapped a bow around it, and then said to the SDRs, okay, here's what we're going to be doing now. And then walk through it and have them practice and whatever. I could have done that, but I did not do that. Instead, I did something different. So what I did instead is this was actually on site. It was in the UK. And I got all the SDRs together. And this was before anything was built. We all got into a room and I booked the room for like half a day. And I walked them through the thinking of building this program. You know, I explained to them, here are the metrics, here's what's been going on. We're not, getting the number of emails back or replies or meetings or whatever, and we need to fix it. So I want you guys to help me. I want you to help me build them. And the reception, even just saying that was they were pretty excited because, they saw the metrics too. And they knew, that they weren't booking as many meetings as they should have been, whatever. And so they were like, okay, yeah, like we want to change this. We definitely want to make this better. And so what we did was I had everybody break out into groups and we did a lot of workshopping, right? So some people worked on outreach emails, some people worked on the LinkedIn messaging, some people worked on scripts. We did some practice calls just out loud for fun. Like we made it fun, right? We also talked through what felt awkward and like laughed at each other if we messed up and, oh, we got to fix that to get it to what we all wanted it to be. And the end result was still an outreach sequence. Like the end product was the same had I done it by myself or with them. So there were emails, there were the call scripts, and there were the talk tracks. But the difference was how we got there. Because they didn't feel like they were just being told what to do. They felt like they built it. And they did. They did. And because they built it, and because they had that belief, they had the ownership, they gave their input, they felt that trust, they actually used the sequencing. And from my recollection, it was actually pretty successful. We did see the behavior change where they did adopt that sequence, and we did see an increase in, meeting set and all of that. So that's the difference that the adoption effect makes. And if you are already doing this with your programs, kudos to you. Continue to do that. Keep it up. This is just the psychology of adoption. There is a psychological side to this. People need to feel that psychological ownership. They need to have that belief. If they don't have that, they are not going to adopt. So I want to end by just saying this, because once you see adoption this way, it's really hard to unsee. Adoption does not start at rollout. It's going to start at the very beginning of the adoption effect at trust. And then every decision that we make as enablers is either going to strengthen the chain or break the chain. So just know that if you are struggling with adoption, it's rarely because people are lazy or resistant or just want to do it. It's usually because something is missing in that chain. Maybe something was skipped. Or maybe you didn't start there at all and you just tried to roll out, right? So the good news is this is well within your control, and you can alter how you do these programs, before you even start building. Consider adoption and consider that psychological ownership, because that is definitely needed with adoption. Because unfortunately, adoption doesn't just happen by magic. It is designed. With that, I want to thank you so much for watching this webinar. If you aren't already part of the Enablement Squad, we would love to have you. It's an amazing community. I think we have well over 4,000 people at this point. So head over to enablementsquad.com, join our Slack channel. We would love to uh, see you on more of these webinars and potentially speak at one if you're interested. There will be a survey at the end of this session. Please fill it out. Your input is so important to us to know that we're giving you what you need when you need it. And with that, thanks again and have a wonderful day.